Hi, I'm the political junkie. In the year 2000, Ralph Nader made a history-altering decision. Ralph Nader, a name few outside the US even recognized, changed everything for everyone. As Justin Martin describes in his book, Crusaders Spoiler Icon, Nader's goal in 2000 was to nab 5% of the vote, as doing this would unlock federal funding for the 2004 election. As the 2000 election polling drew razor-thin between Governor George W. Bush and Vice President Al Gore, some in the Nader campaign wanted him to place his efforts into liberally dense population centers like California or New York. Campaigning in these Democratic safe states would allow Nader to easily tap into a concentrated group of people who might be sympathetic to the Green Party cause, but who normally wouldn't vote Green for fear of handing over the electoral votes of, say, Ohio or Iowa to the other side. Nader's decision illustrates why your third-party candidate is probably playing you for a fool. But before I go any farther, there is another side to this debate. Mr. Beat over at Mr. Beat's Social Studies channel has an exact opposite opinion, and he's made a video about it. So if you believe in an open and robust debate like I do, be sure to go check him out.
There is a large argument out there that we had Bush because of you. Did you cost Al Gore the election?
No, and Al Gore agrees.
Okay.
He thinks he blew it in Tennessee, his home state. Everything else being equal, he'd have been in the White House if he got Tennessee.
Right.
And he thinks it was stolen in a number of ways in Florida. Everybody has an equal right to run for election.
Right.
If everybody has an equal right, then we're either all spoilers of one another trying to get votes from one another, or none of us are spoilers. We're not second-class citizens.
Will you concede that most of your Florida voters in 2000 would have gone to Gore?
Here we go again. Let's start with this. Gore won the popular vote. Only the antiquated Electoral College allowed the man who came in second to become president. Most countries, you know, if you get the most votes, you win. In Florida, 250,000 Democrats moved across the aisle and voted for George W. Bush. The spread between Bush and Gore is about 527 votes. The Democratic exit polls had our vote, the Green Party vote. 39% of our vote would have voted for Gore, 25% would have voted for Bush, the rest would have stayed home.
Ralph Nader really didn't like being called a spoiler.
Gore won the popular vote. Only the antiquated Electoral College allowed the man who came in second to become president.
George W. Bush won 271 electoral votes to Gore's 266. The specific controversy of the 2000 election usually revolves around Florida, where the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a recount that could have given the state to Al Gore and thereby the presidency. Bush won the official Florida count by 537 votes. Ralph Nader received 97,488 votes in Florida. So the argument goes that if Nader wasn't running, enough of his voters would have gone to Gore for him to win the state.
Only the antiquated Electoral College allowed the man who came in second to become president.
Nader is choosing the electoral system he wants rather than knowing the one we have. The popular vote doesn't decide elections. Bush didn't come in second, he came in first by winning more electoral votes. This is a motif we're going to see more of. Nader believes he can fight the system by simply ignoring it.
The Democratic exit polls had our vote, the Green Party vote. 39% of our vote would have voted for Gore, 25% would have voted for Bush, the rest would have stayed home.
Nader's own words, 39% for Gore, 25% for Bush. If you do the math, 39% of 97,488 added to Gore's total, then 25% of 97,488 added to Bush's total, Gore comes out on top by over 10,000 votes. There were other polls demonstrating a similar phenomenon. Nader's own example for exoneration actually damns him. Further, a 2006 study by Michael C. Herron and Jeffrey B. Lewis used ballot-level analysis and came up with an even worse 60-40 spread of Nader voters for Gore. Of course, we can't be totally sure what the split would be, but only a fool would think that more of Nader's liberal Green Party voters would go to Bush than to Gore. Now, Nader apologists often try to hide behind independents. After all, 76% of Nader's voters in 2000 were not Democrats. This employs the myth of the American independent, which, unfortunately, doesn't exist. Well, at least not as much as third-party advocates would have us believe. So-called independents make up 42% of the electorate, but polling consistently shows that the majority of these voters simply vote Republican or Democrat and won't admit it. The remaining open-minded swingers comprise a sad 5% of the voting population. But what about the argument that Gore lost his own flock of Democrats to George Bush?
In Florida, 250,000 Democrats moved across the aisle and voted for George W. Bush.
This ignores what Bill Scher noted in his Real Clear Politics editorial, that the 11% of conservative Democrats that voted for Bush are a known quantity. The same 11% snubbed Kerry in 2004. Even Barack Obama lost 10% of Democrats en route to his 7-point 2008 victory.
He blew it in Tennessee, his home state. Everything else being equal, he'd have been in the White House.
Well, all things weren't equal. As early as October 2000, there was polling showing Governor Bush leading Vice President Gore in Tennessee. Plus, conservative Tennessee had only voted Democrat twice since 1976. Gore losing might have been a shock, but it shouldn't have been. Which brings me back to the critical decision that Ralph Nader made just a few days before the 2000 election. Under pressure from supporters to focus on liberal population centers and away from tight swing states, Nader tripped on his own hubris and fell into a history book. As Jonathan Chait describes for New York Magazine, Nader insisted on spending the final days of the campaign on a whirlwind tour of battleground states, such as Pennsylvania and Florida. In other words, he chose to go where the votes were scarcest, jeopardizing his own chances of winning 5% of the vote, which he needed to gain federal funds in 2004. Was Ralph Nader wholly responsible for Al Gore's loss? No. Was Al Gore responsible for his own election woes? Of course, but was Ralph Nader a measurable factor, a tangible variable? Was his choice to focus on swing states without regard to the Electoral College system we have a risk to the values that he himself holds? Yes, yes, and yes.
Here's where a libertarian really supports everybody has an equal right to run for election.
Right.
If everybody has an equal right, then we're either all spoilers of one another trying to get votes from one another, or none of us are spoilers. We're not second-class citizens.
No one has said that Ralph Nader didn't have the right to run for office. Anyone can pursue office. But if they're not one of the two major parties, they have to consider whether or not they're going to play the role of the spoiler. We have a first-past-the-post system. You either win by getting the most votes and get everything, or you lose and you get nothing. For my final thought, let's go a little bit deeper with this topic. History shows there are really only 3 possibilities for third parties in the United States. Option 1, die. The vast majority of third parties are doomed to flail in obscurity or simply die. Just ask the socialists of the early 20th century, Teddy Roosevelt's short-lived and 1912 spoiling Bull Moose Party, or Ross Perot's Reform Party of the 90s. But what about that minority of third parties with success? Well, mostly they are absorbed into one of the major parties. As many have pointed out, including other YouTubers, the first-past-the-post system incentivizes 2 major parties with large umbrellas of appeal. By appealing to a broad base, they increase their odds in a zero-sum game. Smaller voting blocs are tempted to coalesce around their lesser of 2 evils out of fear. Democrats absorbed William Jennings Bryan and his populism at the turn of the 20th century. Take a look at the Tea Party movement, which disappeared into the Republican Party in less than 5 years. Or the Bernie Sanders revolution, of which around 85% will be voting Democratic come November. 3. Become a major party. Rarest of all, a third-party movement actually wins. The anti-Jacksonian Whigs of the mid-19th century, or the anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act Republicans of the Civil War era, are 2 examples. This, of course, begs the question, if third parties can win, why spend an entire video denouncing one as a spoiler? Well, because even the successful third parties are doomed to become a big umbrella party themselves, or risk returning to obscurity. The short-term effort of third-party supporters to bring about real change is inevitably wasted as the party adapts for long-term survival through a watered-down platform and milquetoast candidates. Third parties are fireworks in a system which demands satellites. The chance of a long-term American political reality with more than 2 major parties, but without fundamental electoral reform, is fantasy. Just as the presidential election is a binary choice, so is the mere existence of your chosen party. Either yours is one of the 2 major parties, or yours will lose badly. And as much as I'd love to have a vibrant multi-party system in the US, we don't. And it's naive to think we could build one with the first-past-the-post system still in place. It's not good enough to say we need more than 2 choices. It's not good enough to say end the tyranny of the Republicans and the Democrats. If your third-party candidate says, vote for me, we can have more than 2 choices. We don't have to choose between the lesser of 2 evils. You can choose me. But they aren't simultaneously calling for an end to the first-past-the-post system and fundamental electoral reform, then they don't want to end the two-party dichotomy. They want to be part of the two-party dichotomy. They are manipulating your votes in order to become one of the two parties they claim to detest. Let me know what you think in the comments, and be sure to check out the video that says the exact opposite of what I just said over on Mr. Beat's Social Studies channel. Mr. Beat, Matt, found my channel when I was like flailing around at 75 subscribers, and his support really meant a lot. So Matt, if you're watching this, well, of course you are. Matt, really, thank you for the encouragement, and everybody go check him out and be sure to subscribe. Later, guys.
I commonly hear the myth that Ralph Nader, the legendary consumer protection activist, spoiled the election of 2000 by stealing votes that would have gone to Al Gore, the Democratic nominee. Well, that's crap. Ralph Nader did not spoil the election, and here is why. At the heart of the argument is what happened in Florida.